Pawnee hunting grounds, traveling companions, a commissioner, a virtuoso, a seeker of adventures, a Gil Blas of the frontier, a young man's anticipations of pleasure. In the often vaunted regions of the far west, several hundred miles beyond the Mississippi, extends a vast tract of uninhabited country where there is neither to be seen the log of the house of the white man nor the wigwam of the Indian. It consists of great grassy plains interspersed with forests and groves and clumps of trees, and watered by the Arkansas, the Grand Canadian, the Red River, and all their tributary streams. Over these fertile and verdant wastes still roam the elk, the buffalo, and the wild horse in all their native freedom. These, in fact, are the hunting grounds of the various tribes of the far west. Thither repair the Osage, the Creek, the Delaware, and other tribes that have linked themselves with civilization, and live within the vicinity of the white settlements. Here resort also the Pawnees, the Comanches, and other fierce and as yet independent tribes, the nomads of the prairies, or the inhabitants of the skirts of the Rocky Mountains. The region I have mentioned forms a debatable ground of these warring and vindictive tribes, none of them presumed to erect a permanent habitation within its borders. The hunters and quote-unquote braves repair thither in numerous bodies during the season of game, throw up their transient hunting camps consisting of light boers covered with bark and skins, commit sad havoc among the innumerable herd that graze the prairies, and having loaded themselves with venison and buffalo meat, warily retire from the dangerous neighborhood. These expeditions partake always of a warlike character. The hunters are always armed for action and offensive and defensive, and are bound to incessant vigilance. Should they in their excursions meet the hunters of an adverse tribe, savage conflicts take place. Their encampments too are always subject to be surprised by wandering war parties, and their hunters, when scattered in pursuit of game, to be captured or massacred by lurking foes, moldering skulls and skeletons bleaching in some dark ravine, or near the traces of a hunting camp, occasionally mark the scene of a foregone act of blood, and let the wanderer know the dangerous nature of the region he is traversing. It is the purport of the following pages to narrate a month's excursion to these noted hunting grounds through a tract of country which has not as yet been explored by white men. It was early October 1832 when I arrived in Fort Gibson, a frontier post to the far west, situated on the Neosho, or Grand River, near its confluence with the Arkansas. I have been traveling for a month past with a small party from St. Louis up the banks of the Missouri and along the frontier line of agencies and missions that extends from the Missouri to the Arkansas. Our party was headed by one of the commissioners appointed by the government of the United States to superintend the settlement of the Indian tribes migrating from the east to the west to the Mississippi. In the discharge of his duties, he was thus visiting the various outposts of civilization. And here let me bear testimony to the merits of this worthy leader of our little band. He was a native of one of the towns of Connecticut, a man of whom a course of legal practice and political life had not been able to vitiate in it simplicity and benevolence of heart. The greater of his part of his days has been passed in the bosom of his family in the society of deacons, elders, and select men on the peaceful banks of the Connecticut, when suddenly he had been called to mount a steed, shoulder his rifle, and mingle among stark hunters, backwoodsmen, and naked savages on the trackless wilds of the far west. Another of my travelers was a Mr. L., an Englishman by birth, but descended from a foreign stock and who had all the buoyancy and accommodating spirit of a native of the continent. Having rambled over many countries, he had become, to a certain degree, a citizen of the world, easily adapting himself to any change. He was a man of 1,000 occupations, a botanist, a geologist, a hunter of beetles and butterflies, a musical amateur, a sketcher of no means pretensions. In short, a complete virtuoso, added to which he was a very indefatigable, if not always a very successful sportsman. Never had a man more irons in the fire, and consequently never was man more busy or more cheerful. My third fellow traveler was one who had accompanied the former from Europe, and traveled with him as his Telemachus, being apt, like his prototype, to give occasional perplexity and disquietude to his mentor. He was a young Swiss count, scarce 21 years of age, full of talent and spirit, but galley in the extreme, and prone to every kind of wild adventure. Having made this mention of my comrades, I must not pass over unnoticed a personage of inferior rank, but of all-pervading and prevalent importance. The squire, the groom, the cook, the tentman, in a word, the factotum. And I may add the universal meddler and marplot of our party. This was but a little swarthy, meager, wiry French Creole named Antoine, but familiarly dubbed Tonish, a kind of Gil Blas of the frontiers, who had passed a scrambling life sometime among white men, sometimes among Indians, sometimes in the employ of traders, missionaries, and Indian agents, sometimes mingling with the Osage hunters. We picked him up at St. Louis, near which he had a small farm. An Indian wife and a brood of half-blood children. According to his account, however, he had a wife in every tribe. In fact, if all this little vagabond had said to himself was to be believed, he was without morals, without caste, without creed, without country, and even without language, for he spoke a jargon of mingled French, English, and Osage. He was withal a notorious braggart and liar of the first water. It was amusing to hear him vapor and gasconade, or gasconade, about his terrible exploits and hairbreadth escapes in war and hunting. In the midst of his volubility, he was prone to be seized by a spasmodic gasping, as if the springs of his jaws were suddenly unhinged. But I am apt to think it was caused by some falsehood that stuck in his throat, for I generally remarked that immediately afterwards there bolted forth a lie of the first magnitude. Our route had been a pleasant one, quartering ourselves occasionally at the widely separated establishments of the Indian missionaries, but in general camping out in the fine groves that border the streams, and sleeping under cover of a tent. During the latter part of our tour, we had pressed forward in hopes of arriving in time at Fort Gibson to accompany the Osage hunters on their autumnal visit to the buffalo prairies. Indeed, the imagination of the young count had become completely excited on the subject. The grand scenery and wild habits of the prairies had set his spirits maddening, and the stories that little Tonish told him of Indian braves and Indian beauties, of hunting buffaloes, of catching wild horses, had set him all agog for a dash into savage life. He was a bold and hard rider, and longed to be scurrying the hunting grounds. It was amusing to see his youthful anticipations of all that he was to see and do and enjoy when mingling among the Indians and participating in their hardy adventures. and it was still more amusing to listen to the gasconading of little Tonish, who volunteered by his faithful squire in all his perilous undertakings to teach him how to catch the wild horse, bring it down the buffalo, and win smiles of Indian princesses. "And if we can only get sight of the prairie on fire," said the young count. "By gar, I set one on fire myself," cried the little Frenchman.